A man sits across from a woman he genuinely likes, 8 months in. Easy laughter, real conversation, the kind of comfort that took years of bad decisions to finally recognize as rare. And she mentions, almost offhand, that her landlord isn't renewing her lease. She's not asking, not directly. She's just mentioning it. And he nods slowly, looks around his living room, the reading chair that's finally broken in, exactly right. The kitchen organized the way he likes it. The Saturday morning silence he spent years earning. Something shifts in his chest. Not against her. Just something. Most men at that moment talk themselves out of it. They call it hesitation. They call it being guarded. They pour another glass of wine and start thinking about how the guest room is just sitting there anyway. The men who listen to that shift, the ones who don't talk themselves out of it, those are the ones we need to talk about. Because what they understand isn't complicated, but almost. Nobody explains it clearly. That's exactly what we're doing today. The first mistake people make when this topic comes up is assuming it's about real estate, square footage, whose name is on the deed. That completely misses the point. After 60, your home is not where you live. It's who you are. Consider what it took to arrive at a space that's genuinely yours. Decades of necessary compromise, in marriages, in parenthood, in careers that demanded you show up a certain way, regardless of how you actually felt. You adjusted. You accommodated. You did it because those were your responsibilities and you carried them with integrity. But you carried them at a cost. Developmental psychologists who study adult life transitions describe a process that becomes urgent in the later decades, the gradual shedding of performed identities in order to return to an authentic self. It sounds abstract until you apply it to something concrete, like the way your house feels when you're the only one. In it, the thermostat where you want it, the refrigerator stocked how you like, Sunday afternoons that sound exactly like Sunday afternoons should sound. That is not a small thing. That is the result of a long journey. Now picture what happens the moment cohabitation begins. Not with this specific woman, not because of her personality, but because of what shared living does by its very nature. Every element of that space becomes subject to negotiation. What goes in the pantry, when the lights go off, whether the television stays on during dinner, how often guests come over, and for how long. None of these are dramatic conflicts. That's actually the core of the problem. They're too small to raise, so most men don't raise them. They just adjust, quietly, repeatedly, until the space that once felt like them feels like a compromise they're permanently living inside. The man didn't lose his home in any legal sense. He lost it in every way that actually matters. So, here's your move. Recognize early that the conversation about your home isn't about logistics. It's about identity. When you're clear on that privately, communicating it to someone else becomes far less complicated. You're not explaining a rule. You're describing who you are. A lot of men get to this point and think, fine, but this depends on the woman. If she's genuinely independent, mature, not clingy, maybe it works differently. And this is where most people get blindsided. The issue has nothing to do with her character. The dynamic that unfolds after cohabitation begins operates below the level of anyone's intentions. When a person moves into your home, when they place their belongings in your space, structure their mornings around your address, sleep in your rooms, a psychological contract forms that no one signs and no one discusses. And that contract rewrites the relationship in ways that are nearly invisible until the rewriting is already complete. Before she moved in, there was a structure to the relationship that had real power. Two independent people, each in their own world, choosing to enter each other's orbit. When you disagreed, both of you had somewhere to go. Both of you had space to breathe. The relationship existed as a daily choice rather than a permanent condition. After she moves in, that structure disappears. Now, one person is in their own home, and one person is a permanent guest in someone else's. That asymmetry, even when nobody names it, starts shaping how both people behave. She may start managing her own needs carefully, afraid to seem demanding in a space that isn't hers. You may start suppressing your preferences, feeling guilty for having opinions about your own home. Both of you drift into patterns neither of you intended. Research on couples who cohabit later in life consistently surfaces what relationship scientists describe as the inertia effect. The the way shared living arrangements create social and logistical complexity so significant that couples remain together well past the point of genuine satisfaction, simply because separation has become enormously costly, not out of love, out of the friction of unraveling two lives that have become physically merged. At 32, that's a manageable gamble. At 64, your time is a different currency entirely. The practical response here: protect the architecture of the relationship before pressure builds. Decide, consciously, clearly, that your home exists outside the relationship's progression, not as a ceiling on what you feel, as a foundation for why the relationship keeps working. Now, we get to the part that changes the whole frame of this conversation. The men who are most committed to keeping their home their own are frequently the ones most genuinely invested in the relationships they're in. That seems like a contradiction until you look at what their relationships actually look like. Take a man named Dennis, 69, former contractor. Been with his partner Margaret for going on 4 years. They see each other constantly. Dinners, weekends, travel twice a year to places they had both wanted to go for decades. Their adult kids have met. They've been through health scares and family complications together. By any honest measurement, this is a serious relationship with real depth. They each have their own place, about 15 minutes apart. Dennis described it this way: every time Margaret's car pulls up, something in him actually lifts. Not obligation, not habit, genuine anticipation. 4 years in, that's still there. He knows couples who've been married half that time who don't feel that when their spouse walks through the door. What Dennis has built, what a lot of men in this stage of life quietly figure out, is a relationship that keeps its vitality because it keeps its voluntary nature. Neither person is there because untangling their lives would be too complicated. They are there because they want to be there. That renewal of choice, every single time, is the invisible engine of attraction. Relationship psychology has a useful concept here: relational entropy, the natural drift of close partnerships toward comfort, familiarity, and eventually a kind of low-grade invisible resentment. It's not anyone's fault. It's the gravitational pull of proximity. And the research suggests it accelerates sharply when cohabitation begins, not from a place of mutual excitement, but from a practical external pressure. A lease ending, finances tightening, logistics making it the obvious next step. The men who understand this aren't closing doors. They're keeping the right doors open. What this looks like in practice: build the relationship intentionally, more time together, not less, but on terms that keep both people arriving by choice. Create shared rituals. Build real intimacy. Just don't mistake the sharing of an address for the sharing of a life. Let's step into territory that's real and worth addressing clearly, because pretending it doesn't exist doesn't protect anyone. After 60, most men are in a preservation phase financially, not an accumulation phase. The home equity, the retirement accounts, the savings, these aren't growing on a 40-year runway anymore. What exists now is largely the picture going forward. A woman moving in doesn't automatically create financial entanglement, but it creates the conditions for it at a pace that tends to surprise people. Here's the pattern. She moves in. The financial arrangement is settled. Maybe she contributes to shared costs. Maybe the understanding is that her contributions come in other forms. Either way, her financial life begins to quietly restructure itself around the stability of your home. Her rent is gone. Her savings assumptions shift. Career decisions may change. Credit management changes. 6 months in, a year in, her financial independence has partially leaned against your foundation. Not through deception, just through the natural adjustment people make when their housing costs disappear. Now the relationship carries a dependency that wasn't there before, and financial dependency, particularly when it's asymmetric, changes how both people operate inside the relationship. She may feel unable to advocate for her own needs because the power balance feels too unequal. You may feel morally constrained in ways that have nothing to do with your actual feelings. The relationship starts carrying weight it wasn't designed to carry, and if the relationship eventually ends, as some do, regardless of how much both people wanted it to work, that financial untangling adds a dimension of difficulty and sometimes genuine damage to something that deserved a cleaner ending. None of this is cynicism. It's pattern recognition drawn from what actually happens, as opposed to what people assume will happen when they're 8 months in and genuinely optimistic. The move here is early directness, not a legal conversation, not a warning, a clear, warm, genuine statement of how your life is structured and why. Men who do this early attract women who can respect it, or they quickly learn whether the woman they are interested in sees their needs as legitimate. Either outcome is useful. There's a force that operates on almost every relationship past a certain point, and if you haven't mapped it in advance, it will make decisions for you without ever announcing itself. Call it accumulated social narrative, and it works like this. Once a relationship reaches depth and duration, a year, 18 months, 2 years, a current begins to build around it. Her friends ask about the future. Her family references where things are headed. Your adult children mention that it seems serious. The cultural script around what committed relationships are supposed to look like starts applying pressure in dozens of small ways, and all of it gradually concentrates into a single assumed destination: cohabitation. None of this needs to be intentional to be effective. A comment about how much she loves the light in your kitchen. A story about a friend whose relationship transformed once they moved in together. A quiet mention that her lease is up and she hasn't figured out next steps. Each of these, on its own, is harmless. Accumulated over time, they form a current that moves you toward a decision without you ever sitting down and actually making it. The men who navigate this cleanly are the ones who settled this question inside themselves long before the pressure arrived, not defensively, not with a pre-rehearsed speech, just with clarity. My home is mine. That's how I'm built. That's not going to change, and it doesn't reflect how much I value what we have. Said once calmly, early enough that it lands as self-knowledge rather than rejection, that's all it takes. A woman who respects you absorbs that and works within it. A woman who responds with sustained pressure or ultimatums is giving you information about whether she views your preferences as legitimate. That information is genuinely valuable. Collecting it early is far better than discovering it after she's already arranged her furniture alongside yours. Here's the part that reframes everything else in this conversation. A man who knows his own mind at 63, who has built a life he genuinely inhabits, who doesn't need external arrangements to validate his worth, who brings a full and grounded self to a relationship rather than an empty one looking to be completed. That man is not closed off. He is not guarded in the ways that damage intimacy. He is exactly the thing most women in his age group say they can't find. Think about the difference between two versions of the same relationship. In one version, she moved in because it was practical, and now both people navigate a complicated daily proximity that neither anticipated being quite this much work. In the other version, two people with genuinely full separate lives choose each other consistently, arrive with something to bring, and never take the other person's presence for granted because it was never guaranteed. The second relationship has an energy the first one rarely recovers once it loses it. Your home, the specific rhythm of it, the quiet of it, the way it reflects who you actually are rather than who you've negotiated yourself into being, is part of what makes you the man worth choosing. The groundedness that comes from living inside a space you genuinely own, in every sense of that word, shows up in how you carry yourself, in how you speak, in how you engage. Dissolve that, and you dissolve something of yourself along with it. The accommodating version of you who no longer quite recognizes his own kitchen is not an upgrade on the man she was drawn to. Everything covered here organizes into three clear positions that the men who handle this stage of life most successfully tend to hold without apology. First, your space is non-negotiable, not as an act of coldness, as an act of self-knowledge. Living apart doesn't mean caring less. Research on couples over 60 who maintain separate residences while in committed relationships consistently shows higher reported satisfaction than their cohabiting counterparts. The address is not the relationship. The relationship is the relationship. Second, clarity belongs at the beginning, not when the lease is ending and the pressure is real. Early, naturally, as part of how you describe your life. Men who do this stop having this conversation repeatedly because it only needs to happen once, stated plainly and without drama. Third, design the relationship rather than inherit it. Don't simply react to what convention suggests a serious relationship should look like. Build something intentional, real time together, genuine shared experience, deep presence, on a structure that keeps both people choosing it. That requires thought and honesty. It produces something far more durable than the alternative. That shift in your chest, the one that happened when she mentioned the lease, wasn't hesitation. It wasn't emotional damage showing up disguised as caution. It was recognition. Recognition that what you've built, the specific quiet life you finally get to live inside, is worth protecting. Not from her, for the relationship. Because the man who exists inside that life is the man she actually wants. Guard the foundation. Everything worth having gets built on top of it.